Today's guest is someone who I'm really excited and honored to have on the show, Alex Sanfilippo. Alex, you are a podcaster and the founder of PodMatch, which is a platform that automatically matches podcast guests and hosts for interviews. You are passionate about helping independent podcasters grow their influence and revenue so that they can better serve their listeners. Alex, welcome. I am delighted to have you with me here today.
Augie, thank you so much for having me. Listen, the honor's all mine. I'm just happy to be here. I love the way that you've shown up for the PodMatch community and just the way you show up as a podcaster as well. At time of recording, more recently, you passed 500 episodes, but listen, I know you're just getting started. So again, thank you for what you do and thank you for having me here. It's truly an honor.
It is, the feeling is mutual. So today's conversation, or what I would like to focus the conversation, is on the benefits of going as guest on podcasts. However, the let's say obvious benefits that you gain visibility, business opportunities, or these things. More the let's say personal development elements of going as guest to podcasts. I will leave that aside for the moment, and what I want to say, and I will start this conversation with Alex, and also for transparency, because we mentioned PodMatch. I have been personally using PodMatch for 2.5 years now, and the only thing I will say, it's been a game changer for personal development mastery, but also a game changer for my own growth. And I'm sure we will discuss about this later on. What you may not know, Alex, is also that you have been one of my greatest mentors throughout this journey. So I'm simply starting this conversation with a heartfelt thank you. And I will leave it to that, really. But I wanted to share it because it is true. And thank you very much.
Man, that means so much to hear. So I will just say thank you. Seriously, so excited to be here today. And I love that we're talking about podcast guesting from a more non-conventional approach when it comes to the results from it. So I just, that's a gift to get to be here to talk about this. So again, just honored, happy to be here. And thank you for the kind words, like making my day before we even get started. So thank you.
The benefits of guesting, going as guests on podcast, and we are both quite experienced on either side of the microphone, and it is quite different than asking the questions, and we will talk about that. I will start with something that I read that you wrote, and you were talking about the hidden, that's how you call it, the hidden value of podcast guesting. So, I will leave the obvious credibility, visibility, thought leadership. They are fantastic things, but I will leave, they are more obvious, I think, as benefits. Let's talk about this hidden value that you call of podcast guesting. And there were two elements in that. One was communication and the other was self-discovery. So let's pick each of them and break it down and see how this happens and how can one utilize podcast guesting if they're not doing it already, so that they can accelerate this, let's say, self-mastery journey, since we are on the personal development mastery podcast. So we can start with either of the two, but let's start however you want to start, Alex. I think I've spoken too much, more than I usually do on my introductions.
I immediately think I love that we're going to talk about these two things. And again, this is truly a gift to be able to talk about, because yes, the obvious things, it grows your business, gives you more influence, like all those things, they are great. Everyone wants to talk about those. But the reality is that hidden value side, as you mentioned, I think is the actual real benefit of it. And I'll just quickly share a short story to kind of kick us off. And I was recently on a hike with my wife and another couple. And I say a hike. I live in Jacksonville, Florida. It's as flat as can be. We call it hiking when we just go on a trail. So we were quote unquote hiking. So we're walking, and my friend's wife, I know him really well. I don't know her nearly as well. She's one of my wife, Alicia's friends. But she said, Alex, I've never met anyone who asks questions the way that you do. She's like, the way you ask questions make me think in such a unique way. And and all three of them agreed. And at the time, I'm not saying this to sound prideful or anything like that, but at that moment I just said, hey, listen, I don't want to really take credit for that. I've been asked these questions by podcast hosts that led me to learn to communicate my answer and also have some element of self-discovery that actually changed my life. And so I was like, so I just am mimicking the questions I've heard great people ask me. And they were kind of like, okay, whatever, Alex, right? But the reality is that's the truth of it, is people are like, wow, Alex asks really great questions. He can also answer questions in really unique ways. And it's because of this medium. And so I shared that story just because I think that that's that hidden value. Like it's what we learn in the process. Now, you and I both admitted to this beforehand, before we hit record, but we didn't know this from day one. Like we didn't get into this saying, I know the hidden value. It took me like 300 episodes to realize that. I don't know how long it took you. I'm guessing not as long,
Something like that.
something like that. Okay. It just took a little bit. So for me, if you're hearing this and you've never thought about guesting, and maybe you don't even know the more obvious benefits of it, but you're hearing this is something that's going to be really special for you to discover now, because it is going to fast track your personal development, personal mastery. Like all those things get fast tracked when you step into this lane where you start communicating. So Augie, I'll turn it back over to you. I don't mean to take over like as a host, but communication, I think, is a good place to start. I don't know if you have a question or you want to give an idea around that, but I think that'd be a good place for us to jump into.
It's a great place to start with communication, and I will, from my own personal experience, I will simply add that my communication is so much improved over these years that I have been doing the podcast and going as guest on other podcasts and interviewing people, and that to a large extent happened because I listen. I think it starts, it's, you were saying about asking questions, the way that you ask questions and how, impactful people find that because of the questions you ask. I think it starts with this exactly, the listening. So the way that you ask questions and the impactful questions come from directly paying attention and listening carefully. As it is a skill. For sure, I have learned to do that. So that is really my comment on what you said. It begins with listening carefully, and then the question comes. Shall we say? I don't know if that is your experience. I don't necessarily have to think about the question. The question comes to me more. That's the best way I can describe it.
Yeah, for me on the communication side, especially as a guest, listening is absolutely key. And that sounds very obvious, right? Like when you and I say that to people, but the reality is most people aren't listening. They've got their phone right next to them, maybe they've got their notes in front of them. So they're reading their notes, thinking about what's the next thing I'm going to say. They're distracted by something else. And the best advice I ever got was from a friend, Scott O'Neill is his name. And he just had this saying where he said, Alex, just learn to be where your feet are. Learn to be where your feet are.
Mm-hmm.
My feet are planted in front of a microphone and a camera right now with my friend Augie, where I am being asked questions. The best thing I can do is be fully present right there in that moment, not 5 steps ahead, being like, okay, he's going to ask me this, then this, then this, and then I got to answer that, right? Like, don't do that. Just right here, just listen really intently with no distraction around you. To me, that's where the answer comes from. And it's not like a sound bite, because there's some very trained media professionals. They'll come on and you ask them any question, they will twist it to their normal answer. And no offense to them, they're trained to do that, but there's not a lot of self-discovery happening. That's already happened previously. So for me, I'm always working on that. I tend to be a little bit distractible. Like it's easy for me to be distracted. That's why I don't keep my phone in the room. Like my phone is nowhere around me, because if it goes off, I'm going to look at it. And then I might miss the real core of the question or the heart behind it. Like where's the emotion from the host? And I think that just the best way you can communicate is really, truly listen. And I guess the best example I can give of this, and you've had this experience too, because I know you've had some coaches on here and stuff like that over the years. Their job is mostly just to listen, to actually hear what someone's saying so that they can respond, or let that person just talk it out themselves. They're just pushing people along. Learning to do that as someone who really enjoys hearing the sound of my own voice and talking, which is maybe a little weird, has been so helpful. I talk less around my friends now, which is maybe a weird thing to say, but I've learned that, you know what, they've got great things to say, and I might actually learn if I just be quiet and listen a little bit. Learning that level of communication has just, I can't even express how much it's helped me. It has changed me as a person.
Me too. I know what you mean, that unfortunately it's very common that when 2 or more people are having a conversation, usually when there is a small gap, someone jumps in to fill in that gap with whatever it is, which, it's nice not to be that person and just allow for the more natural pace of the conversation. Can I bring it back? Because we started talking about communication or improving communication, but from the point of being a guest or going as guest on podcast. So I would like to hear your thoughts on that particular element of improving the communication. I think it's also the clarification of one's message, but I would like to hear your thoughts.
Yeah. For one of my old podcasts, I used to interview guests, and I'll flip to me being the guest in a moment here. But the most common thing I heard from people who were a guest, I was interviewing them about their book, is they kept on saying, I really wish I would have been on this podcast before I finished the book because you brought up a good point that I never thought about. Or they feel that they didn't articulate it well. So flip to being the guest, like you said, it clarifies our message. And the thing is, if I'm talking and I can see you on screen right now, right? If I'm saying something and I'm trying to learn to communicate well, try and make it clear, but you keep on having to ask follow-up questions because like, okay, I think you're saying this. I'm guessing you mean this, right? If you're saying that and I'm actually listening, like we said, that's kind of the core of this thing, right? The foundation is that listening ability. I can realize, you know what? I'm actually maybe not communicating this very well yet. Like there's obviously room for me to grow in this. And I guess a really funny example I can give is the first time I ever went to a conference after we had launched PodMatch. And I got in this room, there's probably a couple hundred people there. It was after COVID and stuff like that. And people were like, so what do you do? The first person I explained PodMatch to, Augie, it took me about 10 minutes to explain it. 10 minutes. You explained it in like 5 seconds, right? And that's great. And so for me, I was like, 10 minutes. This thing's only 2 hours long. I can't talk to too many more people. The next person was 9 minutes. The next person was 8 minutes. The next person was 7. So on and so forth until the latter half of the event. It was taking me like 15 seconds to explain it, and people were getting it faster. If you have to say so many words to explain something, typically it might be an indication that maybe you don't have the clarity yourself of it yet. Because if it takes you that long to communicate it, it's really hard for someone to receive that. Even if they're listening really intently, they want to, it's still a lot. But if you can say, you know what, this is what I'm articulating in as few words as possible, it only comes with reps, but people understand it a lot better. And for my own communication skills, I tend to overtalk, and I don't mean to. Like I talk a lot, but I have learned to hone it in so much and say less words, but say more of the right words in less time. And that right there, from the ability to communicate really well, that is a game changer. Use that word earlier in our conversation. Like it is an absolute game changer to be able to do that. The way that people receive what you say when you can do it with that immense clarity, it changes things. It changes the way people listen to you, the way they respond to you. And for yourself, learning it that well, you have this level of confidence I don't think you have without that.
Confidence is another big topic, and I will park it for now, and I'll come back, to what you were just saying, that initially it took you way much longer to explain what you were doing, and then by practicing, it took you much less. And really, you reminded me of that phrase that says, if you can't explain it simply, you don't understand it well enough. And that applies to even complex topics, which, the nature of our business, it's not a complex topic. It should be very easy to, articulate, shall we say. So that was the comment in the communication. And one other thing that came to my mind about being part in a conversation and communicating and listening was the difference between listening to understand and listening to reply. So many people, if not most people, listen to reply, and I think that's where it twists. We don't have to have the reply ready as we do. And I know I'm going back to the other direction again, but I think there must be a reason for it.
Yeah, I like that you brought that up. In my personal life, have people that I'm more acquaintances I know, and they listen to reply, and it is, for most of us, very obvious when you're around that type of person. You kind of feel like that you're just a shell. They're looking straight through you, right? And they're just like, I just want to say my next thing. They're not usually the most relational people, or they don't have the most successful relationships when it comes to even friendships in their lives, right? The person that listens with the intent of hearing and understanding, though, that's the person that I always see that's surrounded by so many people, because everyone else knows that that person actually cares. From the very least, learning to do that through podcasting, that's a beautiful thing that you will take into your romantic and friendship relationships in a really big and meaningful way. I'm glad you brought that up, Augie. That was a good point.
Let's say someone is listening right now and they are considering guesting, but they are perhaps held back because exactly their message is not clear enough, or they consider it not to be clear enough. What would you say to someone like that?
I actually think that that's okay. It's part of the process. It's self-discovery when you can come on a podcast. If you feel like it's not quite ready, maybe spend some time reflecting, take some notes. But if you wait till you're ready, you're probably never going to do it. It took me 9 months to launch my podcast, not because I didn't know how to do it, but because I kept on wanting to be perfect or better, right? And I think that so many of us get stuck in that. And the reality is, if I go back to my previous podcast before the one I have now, my podcast now is about podcasting because it's really all I do. But my previous one was about entrepreneurship. I brought a guy on. It was his first time ever on a podcast. He'd never done anything media related ever. And it was one of my most popular episodes ever. Okay. And when people emailed in or messaged in, they kept on saying, this one just felt really real. It felt really raw. I could tell that person had never been asked any of these questions before, didn't really know how to answer them well, but knew his craft really well, knew who he was really well. And so again, I think that if you feel that you're not ready, go back to the drawing board for yourself, right? Who am I? What do I believe? What do I really know that could serve somebody else? And then just show up, put yourself out there. The reason people really like that episode so much is because it felt like just another human being talking, which often is better than someone who has been there, done it all, and is perfect, because that's so far from all of us, right? Like, how far are we from that? And so, I actually think of your podcast cover art, Augie, which I really love. It's somebody pushing a rock, like a boulder, up a hill, right?
Thank you.
If there's someone at the top of the hill yelling at you, here's how you get to the top. I already got mine up here. That can be a little bit helpful, but what's more helpful is someone coming right beside you and helping you push it, saying, hey, I've never been to the top, but I can tell you that both of us doing it together would be easier. I find that the podcast guests that show up really raw and maybe don't have it all dialed in yet are the ones that are helping push that rock right next to somebody else.
Thank you for this answer. I think that is, for the person who needed to hear this, it's very good, straight to the point. Let's bring it towards the self-discovery element, because that is indeed, I believe, apart from the communication, of course, is a big part of it. But when you are knowing yourself better, that is, I believe, a benefit that for many comes unexpected. I know, and you were saying it took you a while to realize it. It didn't come in the beginning. I realized at some point that, oh my God, this person, I've never been asked this before. I have to articulate my thoughts, and that was my experience of, self-discovery, in the sense that I have to articulate some thoughts which I never had before, apart from my head. And the sound of language inside the mind is very different than the actual sound. It is quite distorted up there. So when you speak it out, it is in a way revealing, I think, revealing about what it is inside that you have, and you bring it out. I have sometimes surprised myself. Don't ask me for examples because I don't remember, but I do remember that I have thought, okay, I never said anything like that before. So this is my, let's say, introduction to the self-discovery element of being a guest at podcasts.
You shared a little about this. I'm not going to call out a specific time, but I'm going to call out two specific episodes of your show, episode 500 and episode 501. And I encourage everybody, if you've not heard those yet, finish this one, but then look up episode 500 and 501. I think you'll really get a lot out of that. You'll hear more of what Augie has learned and what's been taken from this show. But what you really said there was key. The one word that stood out to me is revealing. Revealing is, to me, the perfect description of what we're talking about here. I have said some things as a guest on a podcast that when I said it, I was like, I should write that down. and it's not because I was lying or making things up on the spot. It's just I had never articulated that way, and it actually clicked for me. Oh, that is what I'm doing. But I never figured out how to say it really until this moment when somebody asked me in a really unique way. And I know we already talked about listening being the foundation of this thing, but it matters so much because when someone asks you a question that no one else has ever asked you, even if it's kind of the same question, just in its own unique way, that might be what finally reveals to you how to answer it correctly. And so for me, figuring out how to answer these things correctly has been like that deep moment where you're like, okay, I need to write this down. Like I need to now think about this. And for me, like I don't, right after this interview is over, when we're done recording, I don't have anything booked after this, because what I've learned to do is leave some space for me to then go self-reflect on it, to write it down. Like there's going to be something from this conversation that I learn and grow from. If I just put things back to back to back to back, I lose that opportunity. It gets diluted throughout the day, right? So if I'm like, okay, thanks for having me on, I got to go, and I jump straight into my next meeting, I'm now going to probably forget some of those moments. And while they're fresh, it's great to leave that space. Plus, if we have a great conversation, we want to talk longer, we can, right? So you want to leave that space so I'm not thinking about, we got to hurry this up, but also leaving that room to say, okay, Alex, you shared a few things in there you've never mentioned before. Why did that come up? What kind of made this spark happen inside of you? And for me, I want to make sure that I really honor those moments. And I'm a firm believer in having pen and paper handy, even in business and life. Have it handy, because when you write it down, it does something. I'm not like a neuroscientist or anything like that, but I know it starts to reprogram the waves in your mind a little bit when you start writing things down. So I think that as things are revealed to you, as you're communicating, write them down, leave that space. You'll come up to your next interview or your next conversation more aware. That self-discovery really begins in that moment.
This is a great piece of advice. I realized that I hadn't thought of it before, but I also do that, but not as intentionally as you. But I have been always, in my scheduling software, there is a buffer in between, so no one can book, immediately after the end of there is at least a 15-minute break between them. And now I realize that from what you just said now, that this is a very important task, shall we say, that is, or opportunity. Forget about the task, because it sounds like it is something that you have to do. An opportunity to assess or to reflect on the conversation or what happened. And you were saying about writing. I also am I'm a big fan of writing. I have my journal here.
Yeah.
Everything happens with pen and paper. I love that. There is something, I think, something magical that happens. And I'm using this word very intentionally and carefully. There is something magical that happens when you put pen to paper. But, again, the reflecting on call or an experience after it has happened, or reflecting at the end of your day about the day, it is, I believe, an essential habit. What was the phrase? That a life worth living is a life worth documenting. So I think that is also, in a way, you're documenting when you write down. It doesn't have to be something magnificent, but something that you learned or could do better, or reflection. Reflection brings a lot of self-awareness when you reflect.
I really like that quote. I never heard that one before. That's good. That's one that I'll go write down. That's it to that point. I actually, if it's okay, I had a question. Just given what you do, I had a question for you on this topic, if that's all right.
I was afraid that this would be the case sooner or later.
Well, I think that so many of us, we're not really confident in what we want to share yet, and not that we're scared to talk or anything like that, but like what we feel convicted about talking about, or our own personal life, like we're not ready to open that up yet. And opening up and learning to do that is really big on our own personal development mastery, right? Is like that journey requires we open up, that we overcome that fear. You've had all kinds of guests on here, and you've been a guest on, I don't even know how many shows yourself. What are your thoughts to somebody who's like, okay, I can share it, I think I'm ready, but I am terrified to open up that box. What are people going to think? What are they going to say? What if I cry, right? Like, what do you say to someone who's in that space? Because again, you've seen it on both sides of the microphone, I'm sure.
Thank you for bringing this up. And you didn't say the word, but the word that came to my mind when you were describing that was vulnerability. And, being that, it certainly is, being vulnerable and sharing openly about yourself of course, to the extent that is comfortable, appropriate, all those things. But it is a necessary element in personal growth by expressing that, because, our main, I believe, reason for not wanting or hesitating to do that is the fear of judgment from others. What if they don't like it? What if I don't say the right thing? What if whatever else fear might come up? And I think by actually getting over that and starting to be vulnerable and share to some extent, to the extent that you want to share, but some things that some people might take it in a way that could be not the way that you want them to. So what? It is a very good lesson and path and journey to becoming more confident, becoming better, because at the very end, what's important is you are sharing something about yourself. Could be an event, could be a belief, an aspiration, a fear. Usually it is, I think, the fears and the aspirations that we are very reluctant to share for different reasons. So, yeah, for a moment there, Alex, I felt like I was a guest on my own podcast. So thank you for this.
The
Doesn't happen
vulnerability.
often.
Yeah, vulnerability. That is the word. That's exactly it. And it made me think of a time when I was on a podcast and I cried on the podcast, and I'm not usually one to do that. Like, I happen to be a follower of Jesus, and like I shared my story of hitting rock bottom and finding Jesus for the first time, and I just started crying on the podcast, and I couldn't help it. It was a very vulnerable moment for me because I'm not much of a crier anyway. I don't really hold back tears, but I don't feel the need to cry much, if that makes sense.
Okay.
But I realized that what I was doing was being just completely raw from a transparency level. And I just was willing to put myself on the line. And that level of comfort just kind of gave me the space to be able to actually have that moment where like this raw emotion just came up. And I know I'm using the word raw a lot, but that's what it came down to. So for me, it was like I was willing to be transparent. And I had a willingness to put myself on the line. Like I was sharing what I believed, even though many people don't share that belief. I was like, you know what, this is me. And it helped me grow in my confidence. That vulnerability helped me grow in my confidence as a communicator, as a man, as a person, right? Like it just helped me really cross this line that I feel that I never crossed before. And it was on a random podcast where we were probably talking about podcasting for the most part, right? But this topic came up, and to this day, I consider that to be a gift. Like that was really an opportunity for me to, again, share that vulnerability, which caused me to grow in my confidence.
Thank you for sharing that. And I think that we might think, or one might think that if you start crying without expecting it or on a podcast recording, that might be a bad thing. However, I think that is very much relatable. So how many of us, if we see someone welling up when they speak about something, I think I would personally pay more attention to it because there is emotion there involved. So that is much more compelling than someone, speaking without that element. So it is, there is so much conditioning that it's not right to cry or what would people say or this or that. But as you said, on the other side of it, there was confidence. And what is more, important benefit out of all that than it's important. The confidence and the relatability that you have with people when you are being vulnerable, because people also have cried, people also they can relate with that rather than a polished version in immaculate speech or whatever else might be. So yeah, vulnerability, it's a big very important thing. It's not it's not easy to, and I'm on my own. Don't think that I am comfortable to speak about anything yet. But the more I do it, and the more I'm asked questions that I was unprepared for, it is happening. Yes,
It's all a journey, right? Like it really is. And I think that that's, to me, the beauty of being a guest on a podcast is that it's a journey. Like you're growing and learning. Like we're not waiting for a destination that we've arrived at before we get on a podcast. Some of my most impactful podcasts are when I didn't know the answers to things because I hadn't done it yet. For me, like I talk about my business sometimes on shows, and I don't know what I don't know yet. And we're not like the biggest company in the world, and I'm figuring things out every day, but like being in it, being in the trenches and being willing to share that vulnerability once again, that does two things. One, it shows someone, okay, this person's human. He's on a journey just like me. He might be a step or two further. That can help me, right? You can help me roll this giant boulder up the hill because he's right there with me. But two, it also sometimes I find the answer, right? The thing I've been struggling with in my own head, when someone asks me a question, we've already talked about this, but like I start finding that. And that, once again, that is self-discovery at the finest. You're kind of like a coach right now, and I'm kind of the person that you're coaching in this moment. You're asking me questions that no one else has ever asked me today, Augie. So I am answering them the best I know how to. That's like you being a coach and me being the person who is getting coaching or the person who's getting therapy, right? Like I'm in that seat right now. It's a gift to be here. And I think that's what I want to encourage people to think about. The hidden value of podcast guesting is, yes, you learn to communicate really well. That's super helpful. But the self-discovery piece, it's worth its weight in gold. Even if no one ever listens to this episode, which I know is not the case for your podcast, Augie, but let's just say it never goes anywhere. It's just you and me here. This was worth its weight in gold.
I agree very much. Can you talk about, since we're talking about this particular, a moment that you, Alex, as a guest, being a guest, you were asked something that taught you something very surprising about yourself?
Yeah, when I first got started, I definitely dealt with some imposter syndrome because I thought I needed to have all the answers. And I went on a podcast that I really had no business being on. It wasn't the right fit for me to be on, but the person was asking very, very deep questions. Kept on asking them, and I did this sounds bad, but I did my best to make up answers I could come up with. And I was very new at this. I regret answering things not fully truthfully, right? But the questions started getting so intimidating and so tough. It was also a live show, by the way, so it was streamed live to the audience. So it was a different level of it. This is my first time doing that. And he asked me a question. I don't recall the question exactly, which it's not really important. What was important was my answer in that moment, which was this: a long pause. I don't actually know the answer to that. And he's like, you want to take a stab at it? And I was like, I don't know. I have no idea what to say. And that was my answer. And we end up wrapping up the conversation a little bit later. And I kind of felt bad. Like, I was like, man, I couldn't answer that question. Like, man, Alex, come on. Like, you got to be better on your feet than that, right? But after the conversation, we shut down the live side of it. And it was just me and him in the room. And he goes, man, I have to tell you, I respect you so much. I was like, okay. Like, I didn't know what to say. He goes, when you said, I don't know the answer and I have no idea what to say, he's like, no one has ever answered a question on this podcast that way. And he goes, I know people are not telling the truth when they're answering some of these questions. He goes, and that's okay. He goes, but the fact that you just owned it said so much about you. And so for me to this day, I still look back. I shouldn't have been on that podcast in the first place. I had no business being there. But I did learn that, you know what? It's okay when I don't have the answer. And instead of trying to BS my way through it, I'm just going to openly say, I don't know. I'm not sure. I don't know how to answer that. And that is perfectly fine to be able to do. If anything, it shows a level of confidence in what you do know when you say, I don't know about that, so I can't comment on it. That for me has been very much so freeing. It kind of freed me from that idea of imposter syndrome, thinking I had to have all the answers to be worthy of being on a platform.
It's very useful. I agree with you that sometimes we say, well, I don't know. And it's very useful for imposter, as for bringing it back to something for someone that might be fearful about being vulnerable. Actually, I will leave it that because it is irrelevant. So one thing, and I will mention that, which is digress. Sometimes I have and it comes with experience, with a conversation. I have a sense of whether it's going in a way that it shouldn't go. And I have the tendency to bring myself back while speaking it. So I hope it doesn't sound very weird. But it just happened now. I was about to go somewhere and I thought, no.
See, that's part of being a good communicator. That's what you've learned through podcasting. You got to pivot in real time. And by the way, I got to say, like, being a guest is great. Being a host is really great as well. Being a host, though, I find to be really tough because you have to listen to my answer, but also think about the people that are going to be listening at the same time, making sure it's going to be valuable for them. And you have to course correct. I cannot tell you how much respect I have for you doing over 500 episodes. I know you're still just getting started, but man, it's so much more work. So a round of applause for Augie, everybody. It's a lot. But anyway, I respect seeing you process in real time and pivoting. That's a great communication skill.
It's also, vulnerability in this sense, because it is, in a way, it is a mistake, one could say, or, it is not polished, or I could have avoided it altogether. But it happened as part of a one-to-one conversation between humans. So I think it is relatable, as I was saying earlier. We all make mistakes, simple ones, or we forget what we're about to say next, or whatever. It is, it happens. I will ask you, Alex, as we're going to start wrapping things up little by little. Let's direct again, at least the next comment, to someone listening to this conversation. A busy professional, all right, that has been intrigued by this conversation and realizing that there is more to going as guest to podcast than what had thought before. What's one, let's say, simple actionable step one could take listening to this, as to progress with it, the journey? We use this word journey and I like it. So
the first thing I'll share, and we've kind of already talked about this point a little bit, so I'll give two things if that's okay. But
of course,
pen and paper matters. Sit down, think about what it is that you want to talk about. And yes, it can be your business, but you want to have your journey inside of it, because just talking about business, that's what advertising is for, right? Like there needs to be a personal touch. It needs to contain you. Pen and paper, writing that down is the best way to kind of discover how those things have parallels and where you can kind of bring it all together. And you don't need to map out exactly what you're going to say, but know the approach. Because I will say this, there are a lot of podcasts out there, and they're not all going to be the right fit. And if you don't do that first, you might start jumping on every show that will have you, and there will be a lot of them that will have you, but you might realize that, like, man, I'm not really growing or developing in any proper direction, because we're talking about golf, we're talking about parenting, we're talking about business, we're talking about skiing, right? Like it could be all kinds of things. And it's just like, okay, what am I doing here? We never want to be the person that's running aimlessly. We want to make sure that we're on target, we're heading in the right direction. Yes, you pivot, you course correct on the way, but that's the very first thing I think that matters. Once you've done that, it's all about doing the outreach. You can't just be like, I'm ready to be a guest on a podcast and sit around. You need to start doing the outreach. And by the best way I found people to do outreach is just make it human to human. Listen, I love AIs and stuff like that, and they have their uses, but like if you're going to reach out to be a guest on a podcast, mention that, like, hey, I love what you're doing. It aligns with who I think I'm able to serve as well. I'd love to share this message because I think it would help benefit some people. I'm nervous myself, right? You can even say that, but I think this is going to be really helpful, so I'm stepping up to do it. If you share in a really, really human way and not being like, here's all the achievements I've done, here's all this, it makes such a difference, because what I find is the good podcast hosts, they're looking for a human to have a conversation with. And if you open up with a robot or something that feels robotic versus just you being raw, like we've talked about, you are going to diminish your chances. But I always tell people you have to be willing to do some outreach if you want to be a guest. So first figure out the right lane of shows and then start doing the outreach.
I think, since we had this conversation, Alex, about particularly the benefit of being asked these kinds of questions, that at least the insightful hosts, on the hosts that do the podcast in a certain way, this is very, very useful and we used the word revealing earlier, and it can bring about a lot of awareness or self-discovery, as we were saying. So I think with that, I'm connecting it really, because of what we were saying, to also PodMatch as a way, very, ideal way, I will add from my point of view, to get out there and become instantly visible to, I don't remember how many thousands of podcasts there are.
I don't know either. Let's go with thousands. Thank you.
So, Alex, as we start wrapping this up, as you have listened to the podcast, you know that you can't escape my two questions, which I always ask. And the first one is, what does personal development mean to you?
Yeah, personal development to me is extremely inwardly focused. It's what happens when you're alone with no distraction, no screen. Perhaps you are doing something that you love. Like for me, it's going on a walk, and specifically away. I live in a city, so it's away from the city. Like that's what personal development means to me, is when I'm there and I'm listening to myself. And I was scared of that for years, by the way. Like getting alone, listening, being silent, where personal development happens, I was terrified of that because I didn't want to know who I actually was. I liked wearing a mask of who I thought other people wanted me to be. Well, that's not personal development. That's building up a wall between you and who you actually are. For me, personal development is that time alone, and where you're just listening to your thoughts and you're letting it position who you become in the future.
Thank you. And hypothetically, if you could go back in time and meet your 18-year-old self, what's one piece of advice you would give him?
After punching him in the face, because that would be step one. I know everyone wants to say that, right? Like that would be it. I would say I'd use a quote from Proverbs, actually, out of the Bible, and it's this: an inheritance gained in haste won't be blessed in the end. And I think 18-year-old Alex needed to hear to be patient, to slow down, to be willing to let the journey take effect, to build the proper muscle that you need to receive what you eventually want to get. I needed that as an 18-year-old because I was very, very ambitious, but not willing to wait.
You are patient now, then.
I'm working on it.
I'm asking because I'm past my 50 now and I'm still working on my patience. It seems like it is the theme of my life. Patience.
Yep, patience. It's a virtue. It's something, I think it's a lifelong journey to learn, right? And that's the beauty of our personal and self-development, right? Is that it can be a journey.
Thank you. I will invite someone listening now to, if they are interested to cultivate the self-awareness via going as guests, to go to personaldevelopmentmasterypodcast.com/guest. And there you will also see the profile of my podcast. And actually we were saying, Alex, and please also say it after me, that I was thinking of having some conversations, some interviews with listeners of the podcast. And I think that would be a very interesting prospect. So I blended a lot of there in one short thing. So that is for me, pretty much my start of the conclusion for today, Alex.
I think that I like that a lot. I've never heard of another host doing this before, but like we just talked about the hidden value of being a podcast guest. And then you said, and here's a way you can actually do it, like personaldevelopmentmasterypodcast.com/guest. Listen, if you're hearing this and you're like, I might have something to share, do it. At the very least, Augie and you might decide, maybe not, but it's probably going to be, yeah, let's do it. And I love when I hear a podcast having their listeners on. It doesn't need to be every episode, but doing that, I think, builds such a great connection. Listen, people that are hearing this, they're here because they like you, right? Hopefully they like you. That's why they're here.
Hopefully.
But they're here because you've developed some sort of trust with them.
Yes.
For you, the listener, this is going to be a safe space for you. If you're like, I want to get started with this might be a really great ground for you to get started. So I love that you shared that as our like call to action at the end of this thing. I think it's absolutely brilliant, and it's gonna fast track somebody's personal development mastery journey, and I'm excited about that.
Thank you. Thank you. I think it is very appropriate indeed. Alex, I want to thank you very much for this conversation today. Honestly, I was very much looking forward to it, and I am, it has been useful, practical at many ways, even to the very end, because there is something very actionable for someone to do. I want to wish you from my heart the very best with continuing your mission of helping podcasters like myself and thousands of others. I will leave it to you for parting words and any final message to the listener.
Yeah, the last thing I want to say, and Augie, thank you again for having me. Seriously, this was a blast. It was so great to be here, and I really respect you as a host. The last thing I'll say to listeners, I'll leave you with this, is that each of us has greatness and creativity within ourselves. You have greatness and creativity within yourself. I believe we're all created beings, and as created beings, we are created to go and create ourselves and to continue moving that forward. And I think that when we position ourselves from a personal development standpoint and we step into our full selves, we create so much better. And that's ultimately what changes the world, makes it a better place. And so I encourage you, get out there, step into your greatness, and get out there and start creating things that really serve the world.
Thank you.